The 22nd general election wraps up with a landslide victory for the main opposition Democratic Party and a crushing defeat for the ruling People Power Party. We delve deeper into the political ramifications. Following the election results, President Yoon says he humbly accepts the will of the people and vows to reform state affairs. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo has offered to resign. South Korea recorded record-high automobile exports in terms of value in the first quarter, backed by growth in hybrid vehicles. It's April 11th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with the country's 22nd general election, which is now over, with a major victory for the liberal opposition parties and a crushing defeat for the ruling party. To talk more about how this will shape the new National Assembly, we're joined by our correspondent Lee Si-hoo. Si-hoo, break down the 300 seats in the new assembly for us.
Right, Jung-min. So it's a definite win for the main opposition Democratic Party, which has secured a supermajority for the second term in a row. If you look at the specific numbers here, out of 254 possible seats representing local electoral districts, the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea took 161, the ruling People Power Party 90, while there was one seat each for the minor Saemildae, New Reform, and Jinbo parties. As for the 46 proportional representation seats, the PPP Satellite People Future Party secured 18, while the DP Satellite Party, the Democratic United Party of Korea, including candidates from the Jinbo Party, secured 14. From the minor camps, the Rebuilding Korea Party, launched by former Justice Minister Jo Guk, won 12 seats, while the New Reform Party, led by the former PPP leader Lee Jun-seok, won 2.
So the assembly will once again retain its large opposition party, small ruling party status.
Right, this means the DP and its satellite party continue to occupy more than a majority of the new assembly with 175 seats, or 58.3% of the total. Moving forward, the DP may have additional support in parliamentary procedures from the 14 other minor opposition lawmakers elected, representing the Saemildae, Rebuilding Korea, and Jinbo parties. Meanwhile, the PPP and its satellite will occupy 108 seats, or 36% of the overall representation, although it may also have parliamentary support from the 3 New Reform Party representatives.
And how will this structure affect future legislative action in the National Assembly?
So as we've repeatedly seen in the previous large opposition small ruling parliament, we expect the opposition to take control of parliamentary procedures by the weight of its numbers. This will leave the Yoon administration somewhat without the momentum needed to push through its objectives. The People Power Party had originally aimed for 120 seats, but their main priority was stopping the opposition across parties from taking up 200 seats, which would enable them a constitutional revision or restrict the president's veto right. This doesn't seem likely to happen, but with the total number of elected lawmakers from the opposition nearing that threshold, we forecast added pressure on the ruling PPP's future course of legislative action.
How did this come to be? What was the regional breakdown of votes?
Right, so this election was sort of a midterm evaluation for the incumbent Yoon administration, taking place 2 years after its initial launch. And as we've seen, the voter turnout in this election was at 67%, the highest in over 30 years. As for the regional breakdown, the DP won in many capital districts and the traditionally liberal Jeollado province as expected. But the key to their large majority is perhaps their victory in several key battlegrounds along the so-called Hangang River Belt and also the traditional battleground of Chungcheongdo province. This is also where DP leader Lee Jae-myung actually cast his ballot during the early voting period. Meanwhile, the PPP won fewer seats in the capital region, but did secure a traditionally conservative district in the Gangnam-gu district of Seoul. Historically conservative Gyeongsangdo province also voted in favor of the ruling party. This is where the PPP's now resigned interim leader Han Dong-un campaigned right up to just days before the voting day.
I see. And what can we see happening in the assembly in the coming weeks?
So the National Assembly is starting to begin accepting registrations from lawmaker-elects, and this process will continue until May 29th, the day before the official launch of the new parliament. The candidates will also receive their new lawmaker badges upon registration. Later, we expect to see shifts in this leadership structures of the parties internally and possibly more power struggles between the ruling and opposition as they get settled into the assembly.
All right, Shihu, thank you for your report today.
Thank you.
And following the election results, President Yoon says he humbly accepts the will of the people and vows to reform state affairs. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and most of the president's senior aides have expressed their will to step down. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
Nearly all senior aides to President Yoon Suk-yeol have offered to resign along with the Prime Minister as the administration humbly accepts the results of the general election that dealt a crushing blow to the ruling party. Yoon's Chief of Staff Lee Kwan-suk briefed reporters Thursday morning, conveying the President's remarks that he will respect the will of the people expressed in Wednesday's election. He pledged to do his best to reform the running of state affairs and stabilize the economy and people's livelihoods. A senior official hinted that such a reform would first involve an all-out overhaul of Yoon's top aides. Most have expressed their intent to resign: the Chief of Staff for Policy, and all senior secretaries, including those in charge of political affairs, the economy and press relations. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who has been playing a leading role in domestic affairs, told the President he intends to step down. The inevitable list of figures resigning excludes those in the National Security Council, as they deal with the nation's security and foreign policy strategy. With 3 years left in office, Yoon faces an uphill battle in pushing through major policy initiatives to reform labour, education and pensions, as well as cut tax and subsidise key industries such as semiconductors. Efforts to communicate and persuade the opposition and the larger public remain an ever vital task. When asked whether the top office would engage with the opposition to win their cooperation on bills related to the economy and people's livelihoods, the senior aide indicated that would be the case. The official added that the President has considered Wednesday's general election as the public's evaluation of his handling of state affairs, and that the presidential office will reflect upon the outcome. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Against this backdrop, the PPP's interim leader Han Dong-hoon resigned, while the DP leader Lee Jae-myung vowed to alleviate the people's hardships. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young has their remarks.
The results of the 22nd general election have produced sharply divergent fates for the ruling and opposition parties. During a press conference on Thursday, the ruling People Power Party's interim leader Han Dong-hoon announced his resignation, taking responsibility for the party's electoral defeat.
The public sentiment is always right. I apologise to the people as the representative of our party, which has failed to gain their support. I accept the voters' will and reflect deeply. Therefore, I take full responsibility for the election outcome and resign from my role as the chairman of the Emergency Leadership Committee.
Han stated that he took full responsibility when asked about the cause of the defeat. Regarding his plans, Han said he had nothing specific to do, adding that he would continue living with concern for the country regardless of his location or role. During his speech, Han congratulated all elected officials, including those from the opposition parties, and urged them to conduct politics that reflected the people's will. Right after Han's press conference, the PPP's Park Jong-ah also stepped down as chief spokesperson. Meanwhile, on the same day, main opposition Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung, who is also the co-chair of the party's election campaign committee, said the results of this year's general election were not a victory for the party, but rather one for the people.
The election results are not a victory for the Democratic Party, but a great victory for our people. We will do our best to alleviate the people's hardships and resolve national crises. We will lead the 22nd National Assembly to protect the people now and open up a better tomorrow for them.
His remarks came during the final meeting of the DP's campaign committee. Lee began his speech by thanking the public for their support in helping the party secure more than its target of at least 151 seats. He urged party members to remain humble and attentive to the voices of the voters following the election. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the latest parliamentary race saw its highest voter turnout in over 30 years. Bae Yoon-ji covers this finding.
The voter turnout rate for this year's election was 67%. According to the National Election Commission, out of about 44 million eligible voters, nearly 30 million Koreans have cast their ballots at polling stations nationwide to elect 300 lawmakers at the National Assembly. This is the highest figure in 32 years since 1992, when 70% voter turnout was recorded. In fact, the turnout for early voting, which took place last week from Friday to Saturday, reached 31.28%, marking the highest early voting turnout for general elections since it was first implemented in 2014. Almost half of the early voters were those in their 50s and 60s, followed by those in their 40s and 70s. This comes after the ruling party and the main opposition party leaders have repeatedly urged voters to cast their ballots.
Consolidation of support from a conservative party and a progressive party, that too is reflected in the voter turnout. It seems that it was important which side went out to vote more.
The high voter turnout also comes after the country decided to disclose the real-time status of early voting ballot boxes to the public using CCTV cameras, further encouraging voters to cast their ballots. 배은지, Arirang News.
In Washington, the leaders of the U.S. and Japan met for a summit on Wednesday. They discussed various issues ranging from strengthening military cooperation to pending issues related to North Korea. Kim Jong-sil reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met for a summit at the White House on Wednesday. At a joint press conference, President Biden announced that the U.S., Australia, and Japan will create a networked system of air, missile, and defense architecture. He added there will be a trilateral military exercise with Japan and the UK starting next year. Another top item on the agenda was North Korea.
We both agree that DPRK must also address the serious human rights and humanitarian concerns of the international community, including the immediate resolution of the abduction issue.
The abductees issue is something that's very important to Japan.
I also asked for continued understanding and cooperation and the immediate resolution of the abduction issue, and the President once again gave me very strong assurances.
The Japanese Prime Minister added that he continues to aim for a summit with North Korea to resolve various issues, a move that was welcomed by the U.S. President, who said his country is also open to dialogue with the regime at any time without preconditions. The number of abductees that Japan officially acknowledges is 17 people who were taken to North Korea in the 1970s and 80s. A senior official at South Korea's unification ministry told reporters on Thursday that North Korea must provide a sincere response when it comes to the issue of abductees, as it's directly linked to the humanitarian crisis. At the Camp David summit last August, the leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan agreed to collectively make efforts to resolve the issue of abductees and detainees in North Korea. The South Korean government acknowledges 516 people were taken to the north from the south after the Korean War. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
South Korea is providing $500,000 worth of humanitarian aid to Taiwan, which is recovering from last week's powerful earthquake. The Foreign Ministry on Thursday expressed hope that the assistance can help restore areas that have been damaged and help the people of Taiwan get back on their feet. As of Wednesday, the 7.2 magnitude quake has reportedly left 16 people dead and some 1,100 injured. The Korean economy is expected to expand 2.2% this year. Now, this is according to the Asian Development Bank, and Seoul's Finance Ministry says this latest projection reflects that of the government here. Lee Eun-jin has details.
Seoul's finance ministry said on Thursday that the Asian Development Bank has maintained its outlook for this year's growth at 2.2%. This outlook is on par with what the government had forecast in December. The ADB also forecasts growth for 2025 to be 2.3%. Based on the ADB's analysis, Korea is benefiting from growth in the global artificial intelligence sector, which has led to a recovery in the semiconductor industry. It has benefited even more than other semiconductor powerhouses like Taiwan and China, where chip production takes up a relatively lower proportion of exports. The ADB also kept its outlook for South Korea's inflation this year at 2.5%, while saying that this figure would improve to 2% for next year. Meanwhile, for the Asian region, the bank has revised its forecast for economic growth to 4.9%, which is 0.1% higher than previously projected in December, and inflation is expected to come to 3.2% in 2024 before gradually easing to 3% in 2025. As for risk factors to economic growth, the ADB cited geopolitical instability in the Middle East, uncertainties of the monetary policy in the United States, as well as the unstable real estate market in China. Jin, Arirang News.
Trade figures for the year's first quarter show Korea's hybrid vehicles leading a remarkable performance on the export front. Park Go-nu has more.
South Korea has recorded a record-breaking Q1 for automobile exports in terms of value. According to data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Thursday, total exports came to $17.5 billion, or nearly 24 trillion won, up 2.7% on year. The value of outbound shipments in March alone rebounded to just under $6.2 billion after a drop of $1.05 billion was recorded in February from the month before. The rise was mainly attributed to growth in hybrid vehicles. The value of hybrid car exports in March jumped 37% on year to a record high $0.85 billion. In terms of domestic sales of hybrid cars, more than 40,000 units were sold in March, an on-year increase of 23.6%, despite domestic sales of all vehicles falling by 12% last month. Sales of electric vehicles were also up by 15.5% on year, with total domestic sales of so-called green cars up 18.6% last month. And 365,000 cars were produced in March, higher than 2023's monthly average of 354,000, but down 10% from the same month last year. The industry ministry said decreased production was due in part to fewer working days and construction at one of Kia's factories. The industry ministry also said it would work to ensure a robust performance for the auto industry in 2024 to mirror last year, when outbound shipments worth nearly $71 billion were seen. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
South Korea's national debt reached a new high last year. According to the 2023 National Settlement Report on Thursday, national debt came to 1,127 trillion won, or around $827 billion, the highest on record. In addition, the debt to GDP ratio surpassed the 50% mark for the first time. Meanwhile, the nation's deficit in government spending came to nearly $64 billion, largely due to a drop in tax revenue amid an economic downturn last year. Prospects of a slash in interest rates this summer by the U.S. Federal Reserve have been rendered unlikely. Moon Hye-ryun explains.
U.S. Federal Reserve officials are concerned that inflation isn't coming down fast enough, and traders now expect rate cuts later in the year than originally forecast. On Wednesday, the Fed released the minutes from its latest meeting in March, which saw another freeze in the U.S. benchmark interest rates in the range of 5.25 and 5.5%. The meeting notes revealed a more pessimistic stance towards rate cuts from policymakers, citing uncertainties in being able to lower inflation towards the Fed's 2% target. Some participants reportedly predicted that longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, with others commenting that geopolitical risks could result in higher energy prices. After expectations that interest rates would be lowered in June, economists now predict that rate cuts could come in the Fed's meeting scheduled in September, given this latest commentary. The sentiment was supported by the U.S. Consumer Price Index for March announced by the Labor Department on the same day, showing that consumer prices rose 3.5% compared to the same month the year before. This is in fact higher than the 3.2% on-year rise seen in February. It's also the highest rise since last September, supporting Fed Chair Jerome Powell's comments that it's a sometimes bumpy road to bring inflation down. With the US CPI seeing 3 straight months of high readings, experts are saying that this might not just be businesses raising prices at the start of the year as economists had previously argued. Following the Fed's meeting notes, US President Joe Biden acknowledged that while there could be delays in interest rate cuts, he stood by his prediction that these cuts could come by the end of the year. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Today, the whole country has been cloudy with some light rain. However, as the amount of rain was small, the dry weather continued. Currently, dry weather advisories are in place for the Seoul metropolitan area, Yeongseon Gangwon-do province, and some areas of Chungcheongbuk-do province. Please be careful not to cause any fire accidents. Even though it was cloudy and with some rain, the warm spring temperatures continued. The weather will be warmer tomorrow, rising to 23 degrees Celsius in Seoul in the middle of the day. However, keep in mind that the temperature difference between day and night is wide at around 10 degrees. Tomorrow morning will start off at 11 degrees in Seoul and Daegu, Busan and Gwangju, 12 degrees. Daily highs will be topping out at 23 in Seoul, Daegu and Gyeongju 25 degrees. On Sunday, it will rise to 27 degrees, exceeding the previous year's temperature by 10. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.